Greetings. This is Chapter 11, Religious Discrimination. As we talked about earlier, religious discrimination was definitely part of the initial legislation by Title VII. We are seeing a resurgence in a lot of claims given people who are Muslim, who practice Islam, and some of the challenges that a lot of different religious groups have with respect to LGBT rights, where we start to see that conflict between religious freedoms as well as um, anti-discrimination when it comes to LGBT issues. And so that line that we walk, right, between those two can be rather challenging, but it's important to understand where the boundary conditions are for religious discrimination and religious practices and freedom of that practice, and where those issues become then a form of discrimination. We have 8 learning objectives in this chapter. The first one, to discuss the background of religious discrimination and give some contemporary issues. We'll talk, as I already said, a little bit about the impact on that boundary between LGBT issues and religious practices and religious freedoms, as well as the issue of how we have more of an anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiment out in the United States since 9/11 and how that's perpetuating and having an impact on religious discrimination. Number 2, give Title VII's definition for religion for discrimination purposes. So there's a very clear definition on that, which we'll get into. We're going to explain religious conflicts under Title VII and give examples. And we'll talk about religious accommodations and guidelines to its usage. Number 5, we'll talk about undue hardship and where it is allowed as an employer defense to religious discrimination claims. We'll describe religious harassment and specifically give you some examples of that. We're going to identify the ways in which unions and religious conflicts can occur, and we're going to list some ways, of course, that management can avoid some of these discrimination conflicts in the workplace. There are a number of different places where our religious discrimination is encoded. One is in statutes, of course, as we've talked about Title VII, a couple of different locations where that is written up, and also under the Constitution. The First Amendment of the Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And it's also been interpreted to mean the choice to not practice a religion. There's no requirement, to be a citizen of the United States to actually practice any particular faith tradition, much to the chagrin of many out there who believe in Christian nationalism. There are a wide variety of religious practices across the planet. The largest one, 33%, are those who identify as Christians. This includes Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, Pentecostal, Anglican, Monophysite, AICs, Latter-day Saints, that's the Mormon faith, Evangelical Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, Quakers, AOG, Assemblies of God. I don't know what SDA is, and I apologize for not knowing that, and others. Then we have Islam, which is like Shiite, Sunni. We have the non-religious, which are agnostics, atheists, secular humanists, etc. We've got Hindus, we've got indigenous religions, we've got Chinese traditions, Buddhists, and others. I'm not sure where my faith tradition sort of falls into here. Maybe sort of secular, I don't know. It is not Christian, but it's Unitarian Universalists. We actually sort of encompass kind of all of these, because all of these traditions are enmeshed in Unitarian Universalism. But nonetheless, Unitarian Universalism is considered part of that. And it's probably reflected more in the other or the non-religious in terms of this graphic. But you can get a sense that basically Christianity and Islam are the two top. They represent over 50% of the faith traditions in the world. But there are many, many paths to truth, as you can see here, or to people's beliefs in what is their faith and what they believe in terms of the divine. So you can see where religious discrimination can be a big issue if you don't fit within the predominant religions of either Islam or Christianity. top religious organizations or organized religions are Christianity in the United States. We're 76% Christian here in the U.S. Judaism is about 1.3%, Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism around the same 0.5, 0.4%. UUs, yes, they are organized, despite what that little question mark says. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association, and there are many of us out here, 0.3%, and then Wicca, Pagan, Druid are another 0.1. So, and there are the remaining, of course, are all just sort of, scattered about. But yes, the top major religion in the United States is Christian, but just because the top religion practiced in this country is Christianity doesn't mean that that is the religion that the government prescribes. And in fact, our government does not prescribe any particular religion. John Adams, one of the founding fathers of the United States, who happened to be a Unitarian Universalist, I might add, argued that in the Treaty of Tripoli that the United States was not under any circumstances considered founded as a Christian nation. It was founded as an independent nation that allowed for freedom of expression of religion. So the history of religion here in the United States is fairly clear. We've had a nation of immigrants, and of course we have a plurality of religious practices. Obviously, it's still primarily Christian, but there is a plurality of religious expressions here in the United States, and a growing number of people who don't exercise any religion whatsoever or practice any particular religious beliefs. They may have a set of beliefs, but they're not associated with any one particular religion or faith tradition. Pilgrims and other sects emigrated from Great Britain because they wanted to practice their religion, free exercise of their own religious practices and beliefs. They didn't want to be required to follow a government's state-imposed belief systems, which was a big part of what was going on in Great Britain at the time. And they wanted, and these values, these come from our founding fathers, who were, in fact, Unitarian Universalists, had a very prominent place in the Bill of Rights. John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Nathan Hale, Thomas Jefferson, all Unitarian Universalists or Congregationalists, as they put it. Title VII prohibits discrimination in employment based on religion. Period. So regardless of our people's individual religious beliefs, our Constitution and the founding of this country was based on freedom to exercise one's own religious beliefs or to choose not to practice any religious beliefs, and still be able to be a productive member of society. The original emphasis of Title VII was focused on people who were excluded from opportunities because of their faith. Now, many of the claims are about looking at how we can allow for expression of religion and allow for expression of religion in a way that may conflict with other issues in the workplace. The number of claims of religious discrimination are relatively small, certainly as compared to other types of protections that we've already been talking about to date in this class. There is a significant increase in cases when it comes to Middle Eastern and South Asian centered sects, specifically Islam and others from the Middle East, Sikhs who are practice Sikhism but wear turbans, and so they oftentimes get confused with people who are members of the Muslim faith of Islam. So it is, we're starting to see more cases in this particular area. There's increased religious workplace activism among Christians that are also generating the sects. So again, this is in contrast to, I'm being excluded because I'm Christian or I'm a particular faith, and those are the original claims. Now the claims are more like, I am Christian and I am asserting my right to practice my faith as I want to, and to use that to discriminate against others in some circumstances, and not all. The EEOC Compliance Manual of 2008 says the claims of religious discrimination have doubled from 92 to 2007. And this was all post 9/11 where we start to see those numbers grow. And as pluralism has increased, questions about religious discrimination have increased. So as we have more variety of faith traditions, we have a more wider variety of people, a more diversity in faith expressions, we are seeing more and more um, claims of discrimination because of their non-mainstream faiths that doesn't align with the United States 76% Christian belief system. And again, like any kind of diversity, right? We want to see diversity of ideas and experiences, and if it means religious diversity and recognizing that not everybody's going to practice their faith the same way that you do or pray the same way that you do, we need to have these accommodations out there to allow for expression, but also not allow that expression of your faith to discriminate against another group in the process of managing a workplace. This graphic from the textbook focuses on a March 2019 survey by the Pew Research Center that found over 50% of respondents believe that Muslims were being discriminated against. So you can see the graphic shows that by far the highest percentage of the groups that were subjects of the survey. So Muslims believe that they were being discriminated against. Jews also believe that Muslims were being more discriminated against, and even evangelical Christians saw that they were being discriminated against. Federal and state constitutional guarantees due process, equal protection, and freedom of religion for public employees where federal, state, and local governments are the employer. So Title VII is the only legislation specifically prohibiting religious discrimination in employment. There are no other laws on the books that protect religion, although obviously our Constitution does protect, some freedom of expression of religion. It also has similar language in terms of reasonable accommodations and undue burden, like other legislation, other interpretations of Title VII or areas of Title VII. But accommodations are built in. The limit of accommodation are built into enforcement, meaning um, that we're going to balance, right? What is considered a reasonable accommodation and what becomes an accommodation that's just it's gone too far, where and it still becomes a damager to the organization and its ability to accommodate the religious plurality or the religious practices. And so there are some limits to it, and so that has to be obviously managed in terms of balancing the reasonable accommodation versus the undue burden. And again, all these concepts are very similar, even with the ADA, which we'll talk about in later chapters, where we're balancing this idea of what is considered to be a reasonable accommodation for somebody with a disability versus what is an undue burden for the organization in that context.